I never liked taking shortcuts, but my husband insisted this one would save us an hour or two. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a heavy shade of indigo, and the road narrowed into something more resembling a path than a highway. We hadn't expected much, a few scattered farms and a sleepy village, but even that seemed strange when we first saw the welcome sign. Hand-painted, tilted, and almost hidden behind overgrown weeds. "Just a little detour," he said with a grin, but the uneasy feeling gnawed at me from the back of my mind. The first sign that something was off came not from the village itself, but from our car. A sharp grinding sound, then a shudder, and the engine died with a final cough. We tried turning it over again, but the motor refused to respond. Darkness wrapped around the car, thicker than any shadow I'd known. We had no choice but to walk. The houses we passed looked empty, almost abandoned, their windows dark and lifeless. After what felt like an eternity, a man stepped onto a porch, his thin frame barely visible in the dim light. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes, and gestured us forward. "Come," he said. "There's an old house you can stay in, safe for the night." Reluctantly, we followed. The house was hollow and silent, smelling faintly of smoke and damp wood. A single lantern hung in the corner, casting long, twitching shadows across the walls. As we settled in, the villagers, an older woman and two men, explained something that made my stomach tighten. "There's a creature," the woman said, voice low, almost a whisper. "The rat spirit. You must leave an offering in the yard, raw meat, before midnight. Lock every door and window, and whatever you do, do not answer if it calls your name. Not even if the voice is familiar." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as some local superstition, but the seriousness in their eyes froze the words in my throat. My husband glanced at me, shrugging slightly, and nodded. We placed the small piece of raw meat on a cracked stone in the yard. I checked the windows, the locks, the doors. The village had a peculiar stillness, and the forest surrounding it pressed close, dark, and almost alive. Midnight approached, and with it, a creeping sense of being watched. Every shadow seemed sharper now, every rustle of leaves amplified. I could feel my heart pounding as if it knew something my mind hadn't yet accepted. My husband squeezed my hand, a quiet reminder that we were together, yet it didn't ease the dread curling inside me. And then, as the clock struck 12, the air changed. A faint scratching, like tiny claws against wood, drifted from the edge of the yard. My breath caught. I didn't look, didn't move. I remembered the woman's words, "Do not answer." Whatever it was out there, just beyond the lantern's light, and it was waiting. I forced myself to sit still, gripping my husband's hand, feeling the forest lean closer, its dark edges trembling with something alive, something patient, hungry, and watching. That night, I understood in my bones that the rat spirit wasn't a myth. It was real, and it was aware of us. Morning came slow and gray, the kind of light that makes everything seem muted, almost unreal. I was the first to wake, careful not to disturb my husband, and peeked through the thin curtains. The village was stirring, though not with ordinary morning activity. People moved in clusters toward the small square, whispering and glancing around nervously. "Are they holding some sort of meeting?" I asked him, pointing toward the gathering. He shrugged, but his brows knit in concern. "Let's see. Maybe someone can help with the car." We joined the small crowd, keeping our distance. The villagers were older than I expected, faces lined with worry, their voices low and tense. They spoke of small, unexplained damages in homes, broken beams, walls scratched from within, yet no doors were forced. Animals had vanished, sometimes livestock, sometimes pets, leaving nothing but a faint, lingering scent of wet fur. "I told you," an old man muttered, shaking his head. "It's the rat spirit. It doesn't care for our tools or weapons. Only fear, and blood, but not always ours." I felt my stomach twist. The woman from last night had said much the same thing. The thought of something feeding on terror alone made the hairs on my arms rise. Some villagers debated cautiously. Maybe it was careless last night, one said. Or hungry, it wants more than our offerings. Others whispered of old remedies, of rituals to calm it, but no one had tried them in decades. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I realized that beneath the quiet voices, panic simmered like coals ready to flare. My husband leaned close. "Do you think it will attack anyone?" His voice was low, uncertain. I don't know," I admitted, though the truth clawed at my throat. "But I think it watches us, always, and maybe it learns from fear." As the villagers discussed their losses and what to do, I noticed subtle things. A shadow flitting behind a window, a sudden silence where a crow should have cawed, the forest at the edge of the square seeming to breathe. I shivered. Something about this meeting felt ritualistic, almost protective, yet the anxiety of the people made the place feel like a fragile cage. By the time the villagers dispersed, my mind was spinning with fragments of their stories. Who had lost livestock? Who had seen strange movements at night? And why did it seem that some feared it more than others, as if it knew which hearts were soft, which minds fragile? We wandered toward the house again, trying to appear calm, but I noticed my hands shaking slightly. The forest pressed against the village, dark and thick, as if it knew we were observing. I tried to laugh, to brush it off as nerves, but the sound died in my throat. And in that moment, I realized the rat spirit was not just a tale, not just a warning. It was an intelligence, cunning and patient, watching, listening, and perhaps already deciding how we would be tested. The master had promised he could fix our car, but it would take a few days. Restless and unwilling to sit idle, my husband suggested we explore the forest behind the village. I hesitated. Something in the villagers' eyes had unsettled me. But the day was gray and calm, and I followed him. The forest was thick and ancient, towering oaks and pines forming a shadowed cathedral above us. The air smelled damp, earthy, and faintly metallic, like rust on wet stone. Every step we took seemed to echo unnaturally, as though the trees themselves listened. At first, it was quiet, too quiet. Then came the sounds, soft scratching, a rustle that didn't belong to the wind, faint whispers curling around the trunks. I paused, straining to hear. A low, urgent squeak drifted from somewhere to our right, followed by what I could swear was a whisper. "Emily, come closer." I froze. That was not my name, yet my throat constricted. My husband noticed my pause. "It's probably just the wind," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. We pressed on, but the forest seemed to twist subtly with every step. A familiar figure appeared between two trees, a friend from my past, smiling, waving. Relief and warmth surged through me, then evaporated when I blinked. She was gone. Only the shadows remained, quivering in a shape that was too alive. The deeper we went, the louder the whispers became, though no one was there. Voices from childhood, voices of people I had long forgotten, merging with the wind. Soft laughter, faint cries, even a calling voice I could have sworn was my mother's. I gripped my husband's arm, heart hammering. "Do you see that?" I whispered. "See what?" Through a break in the trees, I glimpsed shapes moving, too fast, too fluid to be animals, yet too large to be birds. Shadows elongated, distorted, and for a terrifying second, I thought they were approaching us, converging like a living darkness. I wanted to run, but something kept my feet rooted. My mind recoiled as memories flickered. Faces of people long gone, scenes from my childhood distorted into grotesque forms, all pressed into the forest silence. I realized then, the forest itself seemed alive, a mirror to my own fear. By late afternoon, we turned back, eager to return to the house. Relief washed over me when the familiar walls came into view. But the door, it was ajar, just slightly, as if someone, or something, had been watching us the whole time. My pulse thundered in my ears. The villagers' warnings from last night pressed against my thoughts, their words echoing. "Do not answer, do not react." I shivered, imagining the unseen presence that lingered beyond the threshold. We entered carefully, locking the door behind us. The forest outside remained silent for now, but I could feel it leaning closer, patient, waiting. And I knew, with a chill that settled into my bones, that this was only the beginning. Night fell faster than I expected, the kind of darkness that swallows shapes and sound alike. I prepared the offering of raw meat as instructed, though tonight I used less than before, wary of wasting what little we had. My hands trembled slightly as I set the piece on the cracked stone outside, the lantern inside the house casting long, flickering shadows through the windows. The air grew heavy, thick with silence, but the forest pressed closer, almost tasting us. Then came the faint sounds, scratches, whispers, and something like tiny claws running over the walls of the house. My stomach twisted, but I remembered the villager's warning. Do not answer, not even if the voice calls your name. I peered out the window. At first, I saw nothing, only the dark shapes of trees swaying in a stiff wind. Then I noticed movement near the edge of the yard. A creature emerged, grotesque in its form, crouching low like a rodent yet towering in size. Its body was twisted, elongated, covered in coarse, bristly fur. The head was human-like, but distorted, eyes glinting with a strange intelligence, a smile curling inhumanly across thin, sharp lips. Jagged claws scraped the earth as it moved with fluid, predatory grace. My breath caught. I wanted to look away, to retreat, but some part of me, horrified fascination, kept my eyes fixed on it. The creature tilted its head, and a whisper slithered through the air. "Your fear feeds me." I stumbled back from the window, pressing against the wall, heart hammering. My husband grabbed my arm, his face pale but resolute. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Yes, it knows my name," I said, voice shaking. The realization hit me like ice. The rat spirit didn't just lurk in the shadows, it understood us. It could reach into our minds, conjure illusions, manipulate what we saw. From the corners of the yard, shapes began to emerge. Twisted silhouettes of people I recognized, friends, neighbors, even relatives long gone. Their eyes glowed faintly, blank and accusing. They beckoned with skeletal hands, whispering indistinctly, their mouths opening and closing without sound. The forest itself seemed to ripple and breathe around them, warping the edges of reality. I clutched my husband's hand. We have to stay inside. We can't respond." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every rustle, every shadow made me flinch. And all the while, that hideous creature crouched in the yard, watching, listening, patient. Its eyes gleamed with hunger, not for flesh, but for the tremor of fear running through me. Finally, the whispers began to fade, the silhouettes dissolving into the blackness. Only the creature remained for a moment longer, staring at me with a cruel, knowing gaze before retreating into the forest's edge. I sank to the floor, gasping. My husband held me tightly, silent, both of us shaking. I realized with a sinking certainty that the rat spirit was more than a monster. It was a predator of fear itself, an intelligence ancient and cruel, and we had barely survived our first encounter. Outside, the forest waited, patient and unblinking, while inside I clutched my own fear like a fragile shield, knowing the nights ahead would only grow worse. Morning came sluggishly, heavy and gray, like the sky itself feared to rise. I woke before my husband again, heart still thudding from the previous night. Outside, the village was already stirring, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air was thick with tension, like smoke that never clears. We soon realized why. The villagers were gathering once more in the square, speaking in low, urgent voices that carried the tremor of panic. They're angry," one elderly man whispered, his hand shaking as he held a small piece of paper with names scribbled on it. "The rat spirit, it wants more. Last night, some offerings were too small, not enough blood, not enough fear." I swallowed hard. Our own offering had been less than the night before, a morsel meant to conserve our dwindling supply of raw meat. I felt a cold prickle of dread slide down my spine. The villagers discussed the previous night in fragmented, anxious tones. Animals had vanished from nearby farms, some livestock left without a trace, their pens empty as if they had simply evaporated. Houses showed subtle signs of intrusion, scratched walls, displaced furniture, doors unlocked when they had been secured, but always with no visible break-in. The rat spirit was punishing those whose fear or offerings were insufficient, and the realization made my stomach churn. My husband leaned close, voice hushed. "Do you think it killed anyone?" "I don't know," I admitted, though my voice trembled. "But last night I heard screaming. It wasn't animals. Not humans either, something in between. Fear makes it stronger." The villagers debated in frantic, circular patterns. Some insisted that the next night's offering had to be larger, more plentiful. Others whispered that their supplies were almost gone. Panic spread like wildfire. Faces were pale, eyes darting toward the forest edge, imagining claws or glowing eyes. Even those who had followed the rules were terrified. By evening, the village moved like a shadowed ritual, preparing what they could. My husband and I set our offering carefully, rationing the meat, knowing it might be our last substantial portion. The forest outside seemed closer now, alive in a way it had never been before, and the wind carried noises that weren't entirely wind. A low scratching, the faintest squeal, and whispers that sounded like our own names. That night, the darkness felt heavier, pressing against the walls of the house, warping the very air. Screams erupted sporadically from elsewhere in the village. I pressed my face to the window, heart hammering. Somewhere, someone had failed to prepare their offering, or perhaps the rat spirit had hungered for more than mere meat. I couldn't tell. I squeezed my husband's hand as the night stretched interminably, every shadow feeling like it could be alive. The forest whispered, the rat spirit waiting just beyond the lantern's glow, patient, cruel, intelligent. Our fear was a fragile barrier, a shield that might snap at any moment. And as the hours crawled on, I realized the terrible truth. This was not a monster that could be fought with tools or weapons. It thrived on the trembling of hearts, on terror, on hesitation. Every villager who panicked, every soul consumed by dread, fed it. And with our supplies dwindling, with the night growing darker and longer, it was only a matter of time before it came closer, hungrier than ever. We could no longer sit idle. The night had grown heavier with each passing hour, and the rat spirit's hunger seemed insatiable. My husband and I exchanged a look, a mixture of fear and resolve. We had to confront it, or at least try. The villagers had offered warnings, advice, and small protective rituals, but the truth was clear. If we didn't act, more of them would vanish. The forest awaited, dark and impenetrable. Each step we took felt heavier, as if the trees themselves resisted our presence. Shadows moved unnaturally, twisting into shapes that made my stomach turn. The deeper we ventured, the more the world seemed to warp. Familiar paths became impossible. Trees rearranged themselves, and houses we had seen on the edge of the village flickered into existence between trunks, doors opening to nowhere. A whisper curled through the undergrowth. "Fear, give it to me." My husband gripped my hand tightly. I could feel my own heart hammering, the rhythm of terror that fed the creature. Then it emerged, almost fully, almost tangible. The rat spirit was enormous, its body a twisted hybrid of rodent and human. Bristly fur clung to a distorted, sinewy frame, while long, jagged claws scraped the earth. Its face was horrifically human yet grotesque, a cruel mockery of emotion, eyes glowing like molten amber. The smell of wet fur and decay filled the air, making my stomach lurch. I stumbled backward, but the creature's gaze followed us, calculating, intelligent. I realized with a shock, it didn't hunger for our flesh. It fed on the terror twisting my chest, the fear in my husband's grip, the panic we carried like invisible chains. Every shiver, every whisper of doubt strengthened it, made it bolder. "We have to control it," I whispered, swallowing back bile. "If we give it fear, it wins. We can't show it." My husband nodded, determination etched in his face. We turned back toward the village, trying to focus on calm, steadying our breathing. The forest fought us at every step. Roads bent, trees leaned inward, and illusions of people, friends, neighbors, even strangers, appeared beckoning, accusing, whispering. I clenched my jaw and refused to respond. Every time my fear threatened to spike, I forced it down, grounding myself in what was real. As we neared the edge, I shouted to the villagers, urging them to remain calm, to unite in defiance. Some trembled, paralyzed by terror, while others, seeing our resolve, followed. Together, we held the line, not with weapons, but with courage, the courage to refuse to feed the creature. The rat spirit hissed, a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Its enormous form flickered at the forest's edge, frustrated, shifting, searching for a crack in our resolve. We stayed steady, hearts racing, hands clasped, fear held at bay. For a moment, I thought we might succeed. The creature recoiled, disappearing back into the shadows, its whispers fading into the night. But even as silence returned, I could feel its presence lingering in the air, patient and unyielding. It would return, I knew, for any tremor of fear could call it again. Still, for now, we had taken a stand. And in that fragile victory, a small spark of hope ignited within me. Morning arrived, but it brought no relief. The forest still pressed against the village, dark and watchful, its silence heavier than the night. I awoke to a sky muted in gray, the kind of light that seemed to drain color and warmth from everything. My husband slept fitfully beside me, the tension in his body unmistakable. Outside, the villagers had already gathered. Faces pale, eyes hollowed by the night's terror, they whispered about what had happened. Some had resisted fear, others had failed. Those who hadn't prepared enough offerings or whose courage had faltered were gone, vanished without a trace, leaving nothing but the faint echo of screams and the chill of absence. We exchanged looks. There was no comfort to be found in survival when the cost was so high. Even those who remained were bound by a fragile hope, a trembling alliance forged in shared terror. The rat spirit had not been defeated. I had seen it retreat into the shadows, its hunger momentarily sated, but the forest itself remained alive, as if the creature lingered in every rustle, every shadow, every whisper carried by the wind. We tried to speak to the villagers, urging them to face the fear together. Some listened, nodding hesitantly. Others cowered, frozen, unable to move. The creature's influence extended further than I had realized. It fed not only on the immediate terror, but on the anticipation, the dread of what it might do next. Even our survival had become a trap, a constant test of courage. By evening, I prepared the last of our offerings. There was barely enough to satisfy the creature, barely enough to keep it at bay for a night. My husband and I stood together, watching, waiting. From the edge of the forest, I thought I saw movement, glimmers of amber eyes, silhouettes twisting between the trees. I told myself it was the imagination of fear, but a deep part of me knew better. The night was long. Whispers drifted from the darkness, calling names, testing resolve. Shadows bent unnaturally, forming figures that seemed alive, almost human, almost familiar. Each cry, each scuttling step in the undergrowth threatened to unravel our courage. Some villagers succumbed. Their absence left a void in the village, a reminder of the creature's unyielding presence. When dawn finally approached, it brought no celebration, no relief, only the quiet, heavy knowledge that the rat spirit still lurked. Its hunger had been temporarily sated, but the threat remained. The forest itself seemed to pulse with a living, malevolent awareness. I held my husband's hand tightly, drawing what strength I could from his presence. The rat spirit had been driven back, but not destroyed. It would return, patient and cunning, as long as fear existed to feed it. And though the villagers survived, each of us knew that our lives would forever be measured by the quiet tremor of fear we carried within ourselves, a constant reminder that the forest watches, waits, and hungers. Even in the light of day, the shadow of the rat spirit clung to us, and I understood that some terrors are never gone. They linger, patient, just beyond the edge of vision, feeding on what we cannot always see, our own fear.